Today I will CRIME-ALYZE the case of Lindsay Clancy. Welcome back to CRIME-ALYZE. We are opening a forensic psychological dissection on one of the most chilling, polarizing, and deeply catastrophic cases in modern American history. This is the case of Lindsay Clancy. To understand the sheer magnitude of this tragedy, we have to look past the sensationalized true crime headlines and look directly at the clinical timeline. Who was and is the woman at the center of this storm? Lindsay Marie Musgrove was born on the 23rd of December, 1990. In the state of Connecticut, she grew up in the quiet, tight-knit suburban town of Wallingford, Connecticut. By all accounts from those who knew her during her formative years, she was a compassionate, deeply focused, and highly driven individual. She went on to pursue a career dedicated to the protection of life, graduating and becoming a registered labor and delivery nurse at the prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Her entire adult life was built around the celebration of childbirth, the care of newborns, and the support of young families. But in the winter of 2023, that beautiful life met a violent, inexplicable end inside a suburban basement in Duxbury, Massachusetts. Lindsay Clancy stands accused of the first-degree murder of her three beautiful children, 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and an 8-month-old Callan. The defense does not dispute that she committed these horrific acts. Instead, the entire trial hinges on a single terrifying medical defense called postpartum psychosis. Before we look at the crime scene, we have to define exactly what this condition is through a strict clinical lens. Postpartum psychosis is not standard postpartum depression, and it is not baby blues. It is a rare, severe, and catastrophic psychiatric emergency that strikes approximately 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 mothers shortly after childbirth. It represents a total radical break from reality. A mother suffering from this condition experiences rapid onset auditory and visual hallucinations, severe command delusions, extreme paranoia, and a complete fragmentation of her executive cognitive functioning. In the throes of postpartum psychosis, the brain misinterprets the real world entirely. A mother may look at her crying infant and, due to a severe chemical and hormonal storm, genuinely believes the child is possessed by a demon or that the child is suffering in terminal agony, and that the only way to save the child is to end its life. It is a condition that bypasses a person's natural maternal instinct, turning a loving, protective mother into a vessel of severe, uncalculated violence, completely detached from criminal intent. The anatomy of a mental collapse. How did a highly trained labor and delivery nurse slide down the wall into absolute madness? We have to look closely at the months leading up to the 24th of January 2023, following the birth of her third child, Callan, in May of 2022. Lindsay's mental health did not just decline. It completely collapsed. Her diary entries, weaponized in court by both the prosecution and the defense, paint a visceral picture of a woman drowning in her own mind. On November the 18th, 2022, she wrote a chilling entry. I'm so desperate to get a mental break from taking care of everyone that my mind is trying to find something physically wrong with me. She was plagued by chronic insomnia, extreme nonstop physical anxiety, and severe brain fog. Desperate for help, Lindsay did exactly what society tells a struggling mother to do. She sought professional medical intervention. She went to a top-tier specialist. She visited postpartum mood disorder clinics and eventually checked herself directly into a psychiatric hospital. But instead of receiving a clear, stabilized treatment path, Lindsay Clancy was subjected to a chaotic, ever-shifting cocktail of heavy psychiatric medications. Over the course of just a few months, doctors prescribed her a dizzying array of over a dozen different medications, including powerful antidepressants, anti-anxiety benzos, and heavy sleep aids like Ambien. The defense argues that this aggressive, reckless over-medication was fuel on an undetected fire. Forensic experts later determined that Lindsay was actually suffering from undiagnosed bipolar disorder. In the world of psychiatry, if you give standard heavy antidepressants to a patient with bipolar disorder without a mood stabilizer, you can trigger a severe catastrophic manic episode or push them directly into a florid, violent psychosis. Her husband, Patrick Clancy, watched his wife's eyes change. He testified that roughly a month before the tragedy, Lindsay began confessing terrifying, intrusive thoughts. She told him she was hearing voices. She was experiencing a severe, constant internal narrative that she was a bad mother, that she was failing her family, and that her children were no longer safe. Just 19 days before the unthinkable occurred, she was discharged from the psychiatric facility. The medical system deemed her safe enough to go home. They sent her back to the quiet house in Duxbury, entirely unaware that a ticking psychological time bomb had just been placed back into the family living room. The calculated window versus the command delusion. Now we must look at the horrific events of January 24, 2023. This is where the trial completely splits into two fiercely opposing narratives. The prosecution's theory of calculated cold-blooded murder versus the defense's theory of involuntary psychotic overdrive. The prosecution paints a picture of deliberate, highly tactical planning. On that cold afternoon, Lindsay was home alone with 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. When her husband, Patrick, finished his remote workday, Lindsay asked him to run a series of very specific errands. She asked him to drive to a restaurant to pick up takeout food, and then to stop by a local CVS pharmacy to pick up a prescription. The prosecution states that Lindsay explicitly used her phone to map out the exact driving distance to the restaurant, calculating exactly how many minutes she would have completely alone inside the house. From the moment the garage door closed and Patrick drove away, a horrific timeline began. The prosecution argues that Lindsay took her 3 children down into the cold, dark basement of the home. There, she utilized heavy industrial exercise bands. She wrapped the bands tightly around the necks of her 5-year-old daughter, her 3-year-old son, and her 8-month-old baby boy, strangling them one by one. The state argues that strangulation requires prolonged, continuous, deliberate physical effort lasting several minutes per child, proving that she had ample time to realize what she was doing and ample time to stop. But the defense presents a radically different, terrifying psychological reality. They argue that the moment Patrick left the house, Lindsay did not execute a logical plan. She experienced a total catastrophic psychotic break triggered by severe auditory hallucinations. According to her statements to psychiatrists, a powerful, booming, disembodied male voice entered her head. The command delusion was clear, absolute, and impossible to fight. The voice told her that her children were in grave, eternal danger, and it commanded her, kill the children so you can kill yourself. In her psychotic reality, she wasn't destroying her children out of malice. She was obeying a powerful entity to perform a desperate, twisted act of protection before ending her own existence. She was completely overmastered by the psychosis, functioning like a biological machine under the complete control of a severe mental illness. The discovery and the physical ruin. When Patrick Clancy returned to the home in Duxbury after completing his errands, he walked into an eerie, absolute silence. He called out his wife's name, but there was no response. He walked up to their master bedroom on the second floor, only to find the door locked from the inside. When he finally breached the room, he saw blood on the floor, a bloodied knife, and an open window. He ran downstairs, rushed out into the cold backyard lawn, and discovered his wife, Lindsay, lying broken and bloody on the ground. She had slit her own throat and wrists and then thrown herself directly out of the second-story bedroom window in a violent attempt to fulfill the command of the voices in her head. As he stood over his bleeding wife, Patrick desperately asked, "Where are the kids? Where are the kids?" Lindsay, drifting in and out of consciousness, looked at him and uttered a chilling reply, "In the basement." First responders who testified on the stand described a scene of absolute, unmitigated psychological horror. They rushed into the basement and discovered the 3 young children unconscious, still bound by the exercise bands. Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Little 8-month-old Callan fought for his life for several days inside the intensive care unit before his tiny body finally succumbed to the severe trauma. Lindsay survived to severe injuries, but the physical price she paid was absolute. The impact of the fall completely severed her spine, leaving her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Today she appears in the Plymouth Superior Court sitting in a wheelchair, a physical ghost of her former self, facing 3 counts of first-degree capital murder. Her defense attorney, Kevin Reddington, faces a massive uphill battle. He's trying to establish a legal offense of lack of criminal responsibility. Under Massachusetts law, to find a defendant not guilty by reason of insanity, the defense must prove that at the exact moment of the crime, due to a severe mental disease, or defect, the individual lacked the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct, or lacked the ability to conform their behavior to the requirements of the law. This is one of the highest, most rigid legal bars in the United States court system. The verdict on trial. What makes Lindsay Clancy, the case, Lindsay Clancy, unique and profoundly heartbreaking is the response of her husband, Patrick Clancy, in a move that completely shocked the American public. Patrick chose not to condemn his wife. Instead, he issued a public statement offering her total absolute forgiveness. He stated on the record that the woman who took the lives of his 3 beautiful children was not the real Lindsay. He described his wife as a deeply loving, fiercely protective mother who was completely consumed by a medical monster. Patrick has gone even further, filing a massive civil medical malpractice lawsuit against Lindsay's healthcare providers, explicitly alleging that the medical establishment completely failed to attend to her rapidly worsening psychiatric crisis, leaving a vulnerable family unprotected. As the trial reaches its dramatic conclusion, the jury faces an agonizing choice. If they believe the prosecution, they will brand Lindsay Clancy a cold, calculating child killer, sentencing her to spend the rest of her natural life behind bars without the possibility of parole. If they believe the defense, they will recognize the terrifying reality of postpartum psychosis, finding her not guilty due to a lack of criminal responsibility, resulting in a permanent commitment to a high-security state psychiatric hospital. This case forces the U.S. justice system to confront a profoundly uncomfortable question, and that is, where does criminal culpability end and where does severe medical tragedy begin? Can a mother truly be held responsible for an atrocity committed when her own mind had completely turned against her? The legacy of the Clancy family is a stark, haunting reminder of the invisible, devastating power of severe mental illness. It is a case that has forever altered the conversation surrounding postpartum maternal health care across the United States. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive forensic analysis here on CRIME-ALYZE. I want to turn this over to you now in the comments section below with my following question. Do you believe Lindsay Clancy should be held fully criminally accountable for her actions, or do you believe she was an entirely innocent victim of a catastrophic psychiatric emergency? Do you believe Lindsay Clancy should be held fully criminally accountable for her actions, or do you believe she was an entirely innocent victim of a catastrophic psychiatric emergency and of the medications that were given to her? Please hit please click the subscribe button and turn on your channel and turn on your channel notifications. Please stay close to this channel, CRIME-ALYZE, as we continue to track and break down the most significant capital trials and psychological profiles across America. Until next time.